Jason Powell, and Kathryn Rickmeyer joining us, so please give them a round of applause.
Thank you all so much for joining us. And I want to point out one thing that Paul and David from GitHedge said earlier. Nashville is a mecca for Web3. As Representative Powell says, he wants it to be the beacon for blockchain business. And largely, a lot of the reason why there's so much momentum in Nashville is because of Representative Powell, who is joined with me right here today. And I think let's do a recap. I don't know if you guys got to meet Representative Powell yesterday or hear from him, but his first piece of blockchain-related legislation was back in 2018, which allowed for smart contracts in the state of Tennessee. What prompted you to do that, and how did you pass that?
Sure. So I appreciate the question, Kathryn. And it basically goes back to 2017 when I first started investing in cryptocurrency. I wanted to understand it more. So I really dug in and did the research in various applications of crypto, and really started to appreciate the concept of blockchain and its capabilities to improve so many different processes across so many different industries. There's a pretty neat, for example, there's a healthcare company, Hashed Health, that's in Nashville, that's looking at ways that we can use blockchain to make the healthcare records and all the different processes involved in the healthcare industry more efficient through blockchain. So they were fortunate to have them come testify at a committee. I will say one of the main challenges for me is most of my colleagues think that I actually developed a reputation. People call me Representative Crypto when they see me in the elevator. And the number one question I get from my colleagues is, hey, should I invest in Litecoin? Should I invest in Bitcoin? What should I buy? And I'm like, hey, that's not what this is all about. That's a small component of it, is the financial investment part. I know a lot of people are into this space because of investment, but it's really about the applications for that and all the different things that exist. Companies like GitHedge that are trying to make it so that people can get paid in crypto, that are really, it's a Nashville-based company, and there's so many different other applications for it. So I really wanted to make sure that we had a solid foundation in the state of Tennessee for recognizing smart contracts, and that led me to pass in 2018 the first piece of legislation dealing specifically with smart contracts in blockchain. And that led down a journey of people that were very interested in learning more, and I think a lot of different companies decided, hey, this is neat, Tennessee's kind of the first one to do this, and kind of built the momentum from there.
Let's fast forward 4 years after 2018. In April of this year, I like to call it the legislation heard around the world. Tennessee became the second state to recognize decentralized autonomous organizations. Talk about that process of how you even realized that this was some legislation that Tennessee, and not just Tennessee, hopefully other states will follow, needed.
Well, in a true decentralized fashion, I wanted to stay true to the industry, right? And so I'm a little bit different. I don't think that I can sit around and come up with the best legislative ideas. I think that people come up with the best ideas. They're in government, you have lobbyists, you have a lot of different interests. But really, when I have people approach me and bring me ideas, I think that's where the spawn, there's so much different creativity. And so when people heard, after I put out a couple different pieces of legislation to promote blockchain in the state of Tennessee, had different groups come and say, hey, Representative Powell, one thing we'd really love to do is create and recognize DAOs in the state of Tennessee, which is a decentralized autonomous organization. I was very familiar with DAOs, had thought about it, but then figured there's no possible way that I'm going to be able to pass this legislation for decentralized autonomous organizations. To my great joy, we got a lot of people behind it. We built up coalition. I had people come out from all over the state who said that, hey, this is something we want to see. We want to see Tennessee be a leader. Wyoming was the first state, but Tennessee is a little different. I love the state of Wyoming. Maybe people here from Wyoming. It's a great state. I've gone there on vacation a couple times. But Tennessee is where people want to move and set up shop and transact and do business. And that's why I think having decentralized autonomous organizations in Tennessee is a little different, because you're going to actually have these businesses set up and thrive in the state. The one thing I want to kind of say, too, that was very important when it came to promoting this DAO legislation and building it was, again, all the different businesses that came out and support it. But now, already, we're seeing DAOs formed in the state. It was picked up in the media. People are excited. And I think that truly we have so much different potentials for decentralized autonomous organization. And going back and making sure that, again, true to the decentralized nature of our industry, having people bring me ideas for the legislation made a difference.
Thank you so much. And I want to welcome Carol Van Cleef to the stage. And Carol is an expert. We've talked about the state side, but Carol is really an expert on the federal side of regulation. So here we have the policymaker here, and here we have the woman who is figuring out how people navigate the regulations, or in many cases, the lack thereof. How do you protect yourself? So Carol, I want to ask you, what do you think, compare the U.S. regulations, or in some cases lack thereof, where do we sit, in the global landscape?
Boy, that's a tough question to start with. And my apologies. Somebody said it was going to start late and not early. I'd first like to say thank you for inviting me today. That is actually a very interesting question, and I'd like to I'd like to start by saying it's pretty complex to answer that question. The U.S. is by far the largest crypto market in the world in terms of activity, and it's clear that despite all the talk about going to other countries and doing things in other countries because of the regulatory structure in the U.S., at the end of the day, people really do want to be here and operating. When I typically start talking about legislation and regulation and how we do things, I usually like to start by saying, take the world of crypto assets, and crypto assets is the critical word, and put it into different kinds of buckets, or different buckets. And you've got a bucket for your native currencies, so it's Bitcoin, Litecoin, and so on, that are tied to a blockchain, to a protocol. And then you put the assets into some other crypto assets will go into the tokens, and I would say the ERC-20 type tokens, the ones that gave rise to the ICO activity that get used in that kind of a way. Then there's a bucket for stable coins. And then we've got a bucket, and it's starting to fill up a little with central bank digital currencies. And then we've got another bucket, which is going to end up being multiple buckets at the end of the day, with DeFi. But for right now, let's just, something that sounds, smells, tastes like DeFi, we'll put that into that bucket. And then the final bucket is NFTs. And again, NFTs are going to end up being multiple kinds of buckets. So when we start talking about the laws and the regulations that you apply, you really need to look at those different buckets to get an idea and a sense. And then there's the whole set of other laws and regulations that are really are what I would call infrastructure laws and regulations, which are those where we're taking existing laws that we have, whether it's in estates and trust, what do you do when somebody dies with the crypto? How does that get handled on typical laws? Or tax even. Just let's back up to tax. We've got all those different kinds of areas where we have to go back and look at these laws and regulations and figure out how crypto fits into those laws and regulations. So that's a long way of starting to answer the question you were asking about what's going on in the rest of the world. There are a number of countries that have taken steps to be crypto-friendly jurisdictions, but again, you really have to look at what it is that they've done in that context and go back to my buckets, because they may have done something to help one of the buckets, like that token bucket, or to maybe help. Increasingly, we'll see laws and regulations around NFTs, but they're going at specific areas and specific kinds of issues. I guess I know I know the U.S. the best, so I can tell you that we've got laws and regulations that apply in all sorts of different kinds of ways, and we just have to go through and work through them. In terms of going to other countries, setting up operations, you have to be really careful when you get into those other countries with your crypto projects, because they may have addressed certain aspects of law to help you in that specific type of thing that you're trying to do. But what happens if you've set up a corporation, for example, and we won't even go into DAOs right now, but if you set up a corporation and you start having just old-fashioned corporate issues, how are you going to be able to deal with that under the laws of that jurisdiction? At least in the US, we've got a lot of laws and regulations that are well worked out that we can rely upon, but it can become very confusing very quickly.
You mentioned you're like, we were going to stay away from DAOs, but we're sitting next to the DAO god right here, so we're going to get into that a little bit more. But how are people policing DAOs? So right now there's 2 states that actually allow for that. What, regulatory framework, or how are people, monitoring that? What's in place or what's not in place right here in the United States?
I'm a big believer. Everything's fine until something goes wrong. And so right now, with a lot of the DAOs, we're at that stage where everything's fine. Everybody's getting along, that we've raised our money, we're dispersing our money. But when something goes wrong, that's when we start to put these laws and regulations to test. And then it becomes, it's all on us, on every one of us, in different kinds of ways to start to do the policing around that. So we're in the very early stages of really sort of figuring out what this whole world of DAOs really means. And it's great to have, and I appreciate the efforts of Tennessee in trying to bring some structure around it, but we're at the very beginning of this process.
Representative Powell, what's going to be your next step for supporting the legislation that you just passed? What are you going to do to further that and create, some regulation into a point where government is over here and you feel like you have Web3 world, and ultimately these worlds are going to converge? What's the next step for Tennessee?
So let me just back up and say, I think that it's important as an elected official to recognize that these innovations in technology happen at a much quicker pace than government can keep up with, right? And that's a good thing. For us in Tennessee, we basically go into session in January, and then we usually wrap up in May. So it's literally 4 to 5 months. We're passing laws. Usually, you've got to propose your bills, and then in January, by February, what bills are filed, that's what you've got to work with. And these innovations are happening so quickly that it's very tough to keep up with the innovations in real time, and government can't do that. So I think what it's useful to do is to continue to reach out to people in the industry to see what challenges they are facing or things that they want to look at. I think that there are certain components around tokenization that are very interesting. We need more federal guidance along those lines to recognize different aspects of tokenization. There are multiple components. I'm hopeful. Like one of the easiest things for me, we talk about NFTs, and we're fortunate to have the University of Tennessee. We're going to be put together a symposium in February to have government officials and businesses come together and talk about blockchain and things that we can do moving forward. But we all have the most antiquated thing in our wallet right now, which is our driver's license. There's absolutely no reason that shouldn't be an NFT, that we could simply, if we need it, we could show it, right? Keep it on our phone or in a wallet that's not a physical wallet. And so things like that, looking for government, I think make a lot of sense. There's a lot of different applications for blockchain that exist in government to speed up records and efficiencies. And so those are the kind of things I'm going to be looking at, but then also hearing from people in the industry to figure out what improvements we can make.
And Carol, right now, while we don't have, all the infrastructure and framework that we have, I think right here in the crowd, we have founders, we have individual investors, and then we have, very big investors. What can people do to make sure that they remain compliant in our current stage?
Again, a very good question, and one that I do spend quite a bit of time on. First of all, is finding people who really actually know the law and the regulations, because one of the greatest fallacies is, oh, this is brand new, there's no law, there's no regulation that applies. I think we're well past that, but we also have new entrants into the space every day, and it's great, at the start of a school year, and you've got all these new engineering students at, whatever campus around the country, and they're like, oh, wow, this technology is great, let's go. And it's like, You really have to start at the beginning and start to educate them. Yes, it looks like you can create a P2P payment system very easily using this technology, but there are laws and regulations around that. And that's sort of the simplest piece of it. But I think that's the number one issue. And unfortunately, I mean, we've got more lawyers and other types of service providers out there that are more equipped today than they were 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago, to provide the kind of advice on what laws and regulations do apply. But again, going back to my buckets, when you pick up one of those buckets, there is, in each one of those buckets I just mentioned, there are laws and regulations that apply to each, and you need to make sure you understand that as you're going into it, because you don't want some nasty surprises on the backside. Now, that doesn't mean don't go innovate, not at all. You know, just talk to the right people who can help you through this journey.
And so who do you think those right people are? Are those lawyers? Who would be the right person to go to?
Well, certainly you need to have some lawyers weigh in, especially when you're talking about the kind of bucket that you're in and making sure that they understand the ramifications. Now, part of the problem is that a lot of the laws and regulations cut across these different buckets, and the crypto assets we're putting in the buckets are starting to cut across the different buckets as well. So you need to make sure you've got people who have the breadth and depth of understanding, and it may be that you need more than one conversation. And the other thing is be careful about shopping for views, because that's when I've got a little more history than probably a lot do, that I lived through all the aspects of the ICOs in 2017. And what we saw happening, there were some lawyers, and I have to say I was one of them, saying, hey, you know, most of these look like securities. And I've had more than one person come back to me later and say, I'm glad you told me that because it saved me all the pain. Now, there are those who went ahead and went forward with their ICO and raised money and did good things, or, you know, were able to accomplish things. Most of the ICOs don't exist anymore. But going back to, you know, asking the question, you know, it's very easy for an entrepreneur, a young company wants to go shop opinions, shop views. Be careful in shopping those views that you'll always find a lawyer who'll tell you what you want to hear. But, you know, keep asking questions and keep informed and see what groups are out there. And, well, I probably have said more than enough, especially if we're being live streamed.
No, you brought up an interesting point, which is, you know, looking at, is it a security or is it a token strategy? And I know kind of the rule of thumb would be like the Howey test to test if it's a security or not. But in this Web3 world, I feel like there is a fine, or can be a finer line, between a token and security. So what do you recommend when people are looking at that? What are some what are some, you know, bellwethers to say, yep, no, this is a token strategy or this is a security?
Well, the SEC put out guidance in 2019, I think it was, that of a number of factors, I won't say all the factors, that they will look at, you know, in doing a Howey test evaluation. And that's a good starting place to go down and look at, you know, am I doing this to raise money to put into my project in the future? And that's always a tricky one, because I think about the t-shirt vendor, somebody who comes up with a nice idea for t-shirts and uses a crowdfunding tactic and sells a whole bunch of t-shirts in advance of actually going and making those t-shirts. Have they sold a security there? And I don't think that's the case. You know, when you have just-in-time manufacturing, but because of the nature of the crypto assets and what else those crypto assets can do, you've got to go beyond that piece of it. So there are, I love the question. It takes a lot of time to delve into that, but we could take a couple case, you know, questions and, you know, do a mini kind of evaluation of it. When you get into the gaming world, that's where I think when we're talking Web3, where things get a little bit more interesting is that, and it can even be complex now because in a lot of gaming situations, you end up seeing 2 or 3 different tokens that are issued with respect to the same platform. And especially if you get to the 3 tokens, more likely than not, one of those is going to probably be a security. 1 or 2 of them may be just pure gameplay type oriented, to help the function of the game. But you also have to be careful when you're doing that token analysis, is that if it's not a security, it may very well be a currency. And when it becomes a currency, then you get into a whole other set of laws. A lot of them are state law oriented as well, which I've spent a lot of time doing that, so I have a lot of appreciation for the state system and the way it works.
Well, that brings me to my next point, which is there's a lot of opinions, and there's a lot of smart people in this room, and one may see it one way, and one may see it another way. Representative Powell, when you passed the Dow legislation, you passed that unanimously. And for whatever reason, everything seems to be politicized these days, but how are you able to reach across the aisle and pass, what many would consider groundbreaking legislation without, the political backfire on that?
Sure. So I think that, excellent question. I think the big thing with this entire space, it's really a nonpartisan issue as far as I'm concerned. Now, you do have, and I said this yesterday, extremes on both sides. You have people that think that, we're talking about cryptocurrency, it's some sort of a scam, or it's some foreign, kind of crazy, radical thing. And then you have people on the other side that think that basically it's a way to take money from the poor. And they really don't understand the full complexity of blockchain, cryptocurrency, NFTs. And so when I pass this legislation, I want to say too, I have noticed the success of passing legislation, and when Congress and the federal government seems to act on these things, tends to coincide with the rise and fall. So like when the markets are up and cryptocurrencies are higher, people have more interest and they're more favorable toward. When the markets are down, people are a little bit more, they're less enthusiastic about blockchain and cryptocurrency legislation. So when I passed my bill, for example, I think Bitcoin was at $50,000. So there was a lot of momentum in general and enthusiasm for cryptocurrency. The key to me is it's all about jobs. And that's the message. We had different companies that came and testified and said that they really wanted to set up shop and be a DAO in the state. And you talk about the investments that's there. That's really, to me, the key component to creating that. And I want to commend you, Kathryn, because I know this is a very tough, complex issue. And it's tough to find people out there in media that really understand it and can break it down to the level that most people understand. And you wrote an article that ended up going, getting picked up and kind of taken off, that really explained DAOs very well, that led to getting coverage in The Guardian and other places. And so I think that's critical, is having very smart people that understand and can break things down very simply for the public to understand this entire space. And the big challenge is, and this is kind of the neat thing for me, is I have colleagues who they say, I had no idea what you were talking about, but now my grandson is in crypto, or he's got NFTs, and I appreciate what you're doing. So the momentum is building. People that are established in government are now starting to say, this is something I need to pay attention to. And I'm just very enthusiastic about the number of young people that are involved, and I see at this summit and conferences that deal with blockchain and cryptocurrency, because this is the future. Whether government likes it or not, this space is here to stay. It's the future, and we need to get on board and understand it and do things to make it legitimize it and help it along, or people are just going to get left behind. I want to make sure our country and my state that doesn't happen.
And I don't want any of you all to get left behind, so we have about 5 minutes left in this panel discussion, but I'd like to open it up to questions for both Carol and for Representative Powell. Come on, I know somebody's got one question. Hold on 1 second. He's bringing you a mic.
Thank you. Carol, the question's for you. In a trust, if you leave cryptos to, say, your cousin, Does she get a stepped up value like she would if she got your house for tax reasons?
I'm sorry, the questions was whether if you used crypto to pay for a house.
No, if I died and leave my cryptos to someone.
Okay, so I'm not a tax attorney. And what I can tell you is that the other day the IRS came out with some draft guidance on, I guess, adding NFTs into tax treatment for next tax year and how that will be treated. I don't want to say anything here that would necessarily lead you to do something wrong. So first thing I'll say is you should definitely check with your CPA or your tax attorney.
They don't know. The trust attorneys don't have a clue. It's a new, we're all pioneers here.
Well, one of the problems that we have is that, especially in the legal profession, it doesn't do a good job while we have continuing legal education requirements, we are not doing a good job of getting lawyers really educated on the issues, and the tax lawyers are not necessarily taking it upon themselves unless they're presented with the issue by a client to go and look and learn about that. There are some tax lawyers, and I think that the gentleman that's here from Crypto Audit, I don't know if he's still in the audience today or not, but I think he would be the right person. I would go ask that question. Logically, you would think that if you're inheriting the crypto, you should get that stepped up basis, especially if we're treating the crypto as as an investment item, so that you're paying long-term gains or short-term gains on it. That I think is the right answer. But you gave me a chance to vent a little bit.
Okay, no, I hear you. And if I leave it, let's say, to nonprofit organizations, that's probably even more likely that they would be able to have the step up.
I know there's undoubtedly a question or the answer out there, but unfortunately I'm not the right person.
And this kind of interestingly brings up a point that I want to make is, so these are the kind of things, like actually our state treasurer had to put in an RFP to really look at someone that could get into different trust issues and different estate issues, because if someone dies without a will, and then that becomes potentially, the property could be tied up in the state and the courts. And when you have crypto, having the government really understand how to deal with those assets. And so they actually had to pull back the RFP, but these are the kind of things that states are really going to have to figure out, right? Because, people clearly are invested in crypto. They're passing away every single day, and how do we deal with those assets? And just to plug out for Tennessee, we have some of the best trust laws in the nation, so I want to plug our state for trust, but anyhow.
Well, and if I can add a couple of points to that, is that there are a lot of things that are going on at the IRS around crypto at the federal level on tax issues. In fact, they've had a multi-year, I think, project where they're really trying to put in appropriate systems which will allow them on an electronic basis to be able to pull and synthesize the information related to crypto transactional activity that you report. Second, there are a couple of initiatives that are in the process of being implemented. I don't know whether both of them are going to be through the IRS or not, but you probably are aware that the crypto exchanges are going to have to start to file a 1099 or whatever the filing is, but on your crypto transactions. There's been a lot of history around that. If you remember that Coinbase got hit with that John Doe summons, as did some of the other crypto assets. So they've reported on generally higher dollar players in their system, but now they're going to start to have to report on everyone. And the second is coming very soon, is that any crypto transaction with a $10,000 value by any trade or business will also have to be reported to the federal government. And that's going to be whether you're on the receiving side or on the giving side. It's a trade or business, so if you're giving a gift, you won't have to necessarily file that form, but that's coming coming as well. So that's one point. The second is to the point about the state laws, is that, as I said earlier, a lot of the laws we have out there are dealing with, crypto as property, crypto, as a mechanism for validating, whatever has happened transactionally. A lot of these things are governed by state law, and that means state by state they need to be making changes. And there are efforts going on. There is a Uniform Law Commission that is responsible for a lot of those uniform codes that we have across states, that's working very hard on looking at the different kinds of laws and regulations in the states that do need to be changed over in the coming years. That's in addition to, I don't think they're taking on issues like DAO, that's being very brave and stepping out.
All right, thank you, Carol, and thank you, Representative Powell, and we'll leave it up to the next panelists.